Tonight, no deal. Kim Jong-un cuts short talks in Hanoi.
He's quite a guy and quite a character, and I think our relationship is very strong. But at this time, we had some options, and at this time we decided not to do any of the options.
Donald Trump's former lawyer unleashes a stinging attack against his old boss before Congress. Ita Buttrose calls for stability and independence at the ABC after being picked as the public broadcaster's new chair. And members of Sydney's South Asian community prepare for their first foray into Mardi Gras. Good evening, Juanita Phillips with ABC News. Well, the hopes were high for the second summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, but their talks today in Vietnam have ended abruptly with no agreement. President Trump has just spoken at a press conference saying the meeting was productive, but they couldn't reach a deal. He says North Korea has different ideas on nuclear weapons, but has promised not to test rockets. Let's go straight to our team in Hanoi. Michael Rowland begins our coverage.
They are two of the world's most unpredictable leaders, but an agreement was expected to be reached here in Hanoi. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un were both expected to sign a deal, but all of a sudden that came crashing off the table. The US president explained just what happened a short time ago.
We had a really, I think, a very productive time. We thought, and I thought, and Secretary Pompeo felt that it wasn't a good thing to be signing anything. I'm going to let Mike speak about it. But we literally just left. We spent pretty much all day with Kim Jong-un, who is, he's quite a guy and quite a character. And I think our relationship is very strong.
The US President speaking a short time ago. The Washington correspondent Zoe Daniel is also with me here in Hanoi. We'll speak to her in just a moment, but first, her report on how this dramatic second day of the summit unfolded.
They were aiming for substance over spectacle, and it looked as though the summit was right on track.
Yeah, I think we've had very, very productive discussions, and the relationship is as good as it's ever been. Better, I think better.
But just hours before Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un were due to sign some sort of agreement, there was an abrupt change of plans. The US president's press conference was brought forward, the signing ceremony all but cancelled. Donald Trump, ever unpredictable, and his negotiating partner left the world wondering why.
We had some options, and at this time we decided not to do any of the options, and we'll see where that goes. But it was a very interesting 2 days.
Before discussions began, Mr Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen stole the news cycle, calling his former boss a con man and a cheat. The master of the deal and distraction needed a bigger headline to bring attention back to Hanoi. Indeed, both leaders aimed to translate words put on paper in Singapore into action, but they weren't getting ahead of themselves on denuclearisation.
No rush. There's no rush. We just want to do the right deal.
There are people who are welcoming of this meeting. There are people who remain sceptical. But I'm sure that all of them will be watching the moment that we're sitting together side by side as if they're watching a fantasy movie.
Either that or a reality TV show where the key protagonists are tasked with preventing nuclear war.
Chairman Kim, are you ready to denuclearize?
If I'm not willing to do that, I wouldn't be here right now.
And President Trump was upbeat.
I think no matter what happens, we're going to ultimately have a deal that's really good for Chairman Kim and his country and for us. I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. That's where it's all leading. It doesn't mean we're doing it in 1 day or 2 days, but it's all leading toward a very, very big success.
So it's going to take time. And with these two leaders involved, anything is possible, or not. Zoe Daniel, ABC News, Hanoi.
We can bring in Zoe Daniel now, who has just come out of Donald Trump's media conference here on the other side of Hanoi. Zoe, good evening. So, how bad is this for the two leaders?
Yes, well, it could be spin from the President, Michael, but essentially he said you have to be prepared to walk, and he does call himself the master of the art of the deal. Essentially, he said that the North Koreans wanted all sanctions lifted in return for the concessions that they were prepared to offer, things like decommissioning their main nuclear launch site. The Americans simply weren't prepared to go there at this point, and really that would have been 0 to 100. You can't lift sanctions before the North Koreans have actually demonstrated that they've done something. So we really are a long way from that. I think the problem we have though now, Michael, is this a stalemate? Does someone have to compromise and step forward to advance this from this point? Donald Trump said no third summit has been planned. He said it wasn't a get up, walk out kind of situation. They shook hands and went on their way, agreeing to talk again. But really, for the moment, limbo.
Zoe, thank you. We'll come back to you a bit later on. South Korea, of course, played a pivotal role in encouraging, persuading its northern neighbour to meet with the United States, not once, but now twice. Our North Asia correspondent Jake Sturmer is in Seoul. Jake, good evening to you. What is the reaction on the ground there?
Michael, right now we haven't received any response from the South Korean government, but this is definitely not the result leaders would have been hoping for. There was talk here about the lifting of those deal-breaking economic sanctions that would allow for greater cooperation between the North and the South, and even the possibility of an end-of-war declaration. That all seems a long way from here now, and that's likely to disappoint many Koreans. Not to mention damage the standing of the South Korean government, which was banking on some concrete results out of this summit. It now seems clear that if the South Korean government wants to make some progress with the North, at least in the short term, it'll be doing it on its own.
Jake Sturmer in Seoul, thank you so much. Now, the events here in Hanoi weren't the only thing on Donald Trump's mind today. As Zoe Daniel mentioned earlier, yes, overnight, his former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, was delivering that explosive testimony to a US Congressional Committee hearing with potentially damaging impacts on Donald Trump's presidency. Our Washington correspondent Connor Duffy has the latest on that.
He once promised to take a bullet for the president. Today, he fired round after round directly at him.
He is a racist, he is a con man, and he is a cheat.
The seat of US political power was bursting at the seams with eager onlookers, and they weren't disappointed. Inside, Michael Cohen claimed Donald Trump knew of Russian plans to hack his 2016 election rival Hillary Clinton. He said he was in the office when Mr. Trump took a call from Roger Stone, a longtime political advisor.
Mr. Stone told Mr. Trump that he had just gotten off the phone with Julian Assange, and that Mr. Assange told Mr. Stone that within a couple of days there would be a massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign.
He also claimed Donald Trump used coded mob-like language to direct him to lie about plans for a Trump Tower in Moscow.
Mr. Trump knew of and directed the Trump-Moscow negotiations throughout the campaign and lied about it.
Donald Trump stayed up late in Vietnam to watch the testimony, tweeting Michael Cohen was one of many lawyers who represented me, unfortunately. He was just disbarred by the state Supreme Court for lying and fraud. He is lying in order to reduce his prison time. Most of Michael Cohen's most damaging claims were about Russia. There's a big problem, though. He has no evidence to back them up. And as a convicted liar, Republicans were quick to shred his credibility.
You have a history of lying over and over and over again.
Mr. Cohen, you called Donald Trump a cheat in your opening testimony. What would you call yourself?
A fool.
It was incredible theatre, and DC pubs opened early to take advantage.
I'm not persuaded that anything will come out of today.
This travesty, this circus show, and the lying liars who lie about each other lying here today.
It might have provided some entertainment for the locals, but for Michael Cohen, the next stop will be a federal prison. Connor Duffy, ABC News, Washington.
Well, not surprisingly, Donald Trump was asked to respond to Michael Cohen's evidence at his media conference a short time ago. Here's what the US president had to say.
He lied about so many different things, and I was actually impressed that he didn't say, well, I think there was collusion for this reason or that. He didn't say that. He said no collusion, and I was a little impressed by that, frankly. He could have gone all out. He only won about 95% instead of 100%. But the fact is there is no collusion, and I call it the witch hunt. This should never happen to another president. This is so bad for our country.
Donald Trump, let's bring back into the conversation now our Washington correspondent Zoe Daniel, who also equally unsurprisingly has been keeping a close eye on both stories. So Zoe, how much of a distraction was this evidence by Michael Cohen for Donald Trump today here in Hanoi?
No doubt a distraction in part, Michael, but Donald Trump ever mercurial there, almost thanking Michael Cohen for saying that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, but equally dismissing Michael Cohen as a liar, and bearing in mind Michael Cohen is going to jail for lying to the FBI. The other thing, though, Michael, that Donald Trump was really infuriated about was the fact that the Democrats held this hearing while he was trying to execute some very complex international diplomacy here in Vietnam.
And Zoe, finishing up with this shortened summit, Donald Trump expected to fly out of Hanoi very shortly. Where to next on these torturous negotiations with North Korea on its nuclear program?
Yes, well, he leaves the formerly Little Rocket Man, now my friend, to head back to DC. And you'll recall that phrase, fire and fury, Michael. I think Donald Trump will leave here feeling pretty disappointed with his week, both domestically and internationally. He'll go back to DC trying to work out how to advance this process with Mike Pompeo, his Secretary of State. But I think the other thing to keep very front of mind is that, remember, there was talk that Robert Mueller's report, the special counsel's report, could be released this week. It wasn't, because the Justice Department thought that'd be inappropriate timing, but that could also be imminent.
Zoe Daniel, thank you, and please remember you can stay across this still fast-moving story on ABC News tonight. But for now, it is back to your local newsrooms.